Vincent, would you introduce yourself and begin?
First, I would like to thank the Progressive Caucus for inviting us to speak with you this morning. We truly appreciate the opportunity. My name is Vincent J.R. Emanuele. I am a resident of Indiana, and I served with the United States Marine Corps from September 2002 through January of 2006 with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, Alpha Company, 3rd Platoon as a rifleman and a squad automatic machine gunner. I was deployed to Iraq in August of 2004, where I spent my time in Iraq as a rifleman in 3rd Squad, 1st Team, 3rd Platoon. Our area of operation was a small border town a mile south of the Euphrates and 15 miles east of Syria called Al-Qaim, Iraq. The issues I will be discussing today include rules of engagement or the breakdown thereof, the death of innocents, the destruction of civilian property, the abuse of prisoners, and the mishandling of the dead, all of which took place during the duration of our tour in Iraq. These stories are not mine alone. These are our stories, the stories of 3rd Platoon. I had the chance to speak with several members from my platoon, and these are the events they and I felt were pertinent to discuss with you today. An act that took place quite often in Iraq was that of taking pop shots at cars that drove by. This was quite easy for most Marines to get away with because our rules of engagement stated that the town of Al-Qaim had already been forewarned and knew to pull their cars to a complete stop when approaching a United States convoy. Our rules of engagement stated that we should first fire warning shots into the ground in front of the car, then the engine block, and then the driver and passengers. Most of the time, however, the shots made their way straight to those very individuals in the car. That is if the car was even moving in the first place. Many times, cars that had actually pulled off to the side of the road were also shot at. Of course, the consequences of such actions posed a huge problem for those of us who patrolled the streets every day. This was not the best way to become friendlier with an already very hostile local population. This was not an isolated incident and took place for most of my 8-month deployment. In one particular instance, we were sent on a mission to blow up a bridge that was being used to transport weapons across the Euphrates. During this mission, we were ambushed and were forced to return fire in order to make our way out of the city. There are several problems with instances such as these. First, it was very difficult, if not impossible, to clearly identify hostile targets. This resulted in our unit firing into the town with little or no identification of these hostile targets. Because of inadequate intelligence and lack of personnel or competent leadership, our platoon lost a good Marine that day, and I lost my best friend. The retrans site, otherwise known as a retransmission site, was a communications post set up on a plateau overlooking the town of Al-Qaim. This communication site was there to provide communications between the main base at the railroad station where we were stationed and an outpost in Husayba, Iraq, where Bravo Company's area of operations took place. We would encounter mortar fire on a daily basis. Most of the time, we would return this fire with mortar fire of our own. Some of the time, counter battery would call in a specific location for us to exchange fire. On occasion, when the counter battery could not call in a specific location, our unit would fire upon the town anyway. Sometimes in the hills off to the west of the town where we thought the mortar fire was coming from, and other times straight into the town of Al-Qaim itself, onto buildings, houses, and businesses. Because of the lack of personnel at the retrans site, very rarely, if ever, did we conduct a battle damage assessment report to report civilian deaths and destruction. So almost all of the time, these incidents went unreported and not investigated. This was not an isolated incident as well. Another mission our platoon was tasked to take on was that of transporting prisoners from our detention facility on base back to the desert. The reason I say the desert and not their town is because that is exactly where we would drop them off, in the middle of nowhere. Now, most of these men had obviously been deemed innocent, or else they would have been moved to a more permanent detention facility and not released back into the local population. Our unit engaged in punching, kicking, butt stroking, or generally harassing and abusing these very prisoners until the point at which our unit would take them in the middle of the desert, miles from their respective homes, and at times throw them out of the back of our Humvees, all the while continually punching, kicking, and at times even throwing softball-sized rocks at their backs as they ran away. This, once again, was not an isolated incident. Possibly the most disturbing of what took place in Iraq was the mishandling of the dead. On several occasions, our convoy came across bodies that had been decapitated and were lying on the road, sometimes for weeks. When encountering these bodies, standard procedure was to run over the corpses, sometimes even stopping and taking pictures, which was also standard practice when encountering the dead in Iraq. This, along with neglecting to account for many of those who were killed or wounded. On one specific occasion, after I had personally shot a man attempting to flee while planting a roadside bomb. We drug his body out of the ditch he was laying in, and we subsequently left that body, slide please. We subsequently left that body to rot in the field where we saw this man up to a week later. These are just a few of the disturbing and unacceptable stories I could share with you from my time in Iraq. Others would include continually dehumanizing Iraqis by referring to them as Hajis or sand niggers. Even the racist and sexist nature that exists within the military itself, which was overtly obvious on a daily basis. I could also tell story upon story of families being destroyed as a result of an occupation that unfortunately should have never taken place. Several members of my platoon went through divorces and or separations, many of the time with children involved. I could also testify to the overwhelming majority of those I served with who did not think dying in Iraq was honorable or acceptable, nor did they enjoy or want to go back to Iraq a second or third time. Unfortunately, because of personal circumstances, whether they be financial or family issues, many indeed were deployed up to 3 times during their 4-year enlistment. In fact, many, including myself at times, did not have any intention of helping the Iraqis. Because of the hostile intent, as well as the loss of lives close to us, our best friends, our unit had a general disdain and distaste for Iraqis and their country. Further, our unit, for the most part, did not trust our command and had a general mistrust and distaste of this occupation from its inception onward. I could also speak to the personal attacks veterans, including myself, and many others had to encounter once we were willing to be treated for PTSD within our unit. The idea of being a real Marine and that does not complain when coming back home and who sucks it up and does the job that we were tasked to do. This mentality resulted in many of the Marines I served with, including myself, turning to drugs and alcohol to cope with the horrors of this bloody occupation. I'm going to leave the time for the rest of the members. I want to once again, I would like to thank the Progressive Caucus for inviting us to speak on this occasion. Thank you.
Thank you.